It is in our nature to tell stories and inform others of our life events. Storytelling, whether factual or fictional, is an intrinsic human characteristic. We have been telling stories since the beginning of human civilization. From the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Divine Comedy of Dante's Inferno, the masterworks of Shakespeare, to now having films be the giants of storytelling. From ancient tablets to books, stages, and now screen, storytelling has evolved through the ages. Now a new medium is rising and might evolve storytelling even further. That medium is the video game. Video games have been telling stories since the early 1980s, but only recently have been seen as a proper way of storytelling. More cinematic techniques being used, an emphasis on more and better stories, and companies putting more and more money into video games has seen the rise of cinematic-like games such as God of War, Detroit Become Human, The Last of Us, and much more. Video games have even started their own ways of telling stories. For example, the critically acclaimed Elden Ring has taken storytelling in a new way, with the player having to find the story, or with games like It Takes Two, where it requires two players to play the game and experience the story together. During this video essay, I will be discussing video games and how they have become a new narrative medium like films, books, and TV by using characters, narrative, and genre. For this, we'll be discussing the rise of video games from having no story to having games with a fully dedicated story, then using 3 different games to see the different components of narrative storytelling. This will give us a look at how video games incorporate these different aspects of storytelling and how they've used them in different and similar ways to film. So, how did video games evolve from having no story to having full games dedicated to telling one? Video games have been around in some way or form since the early 1950s and the Cold War era, but were never commercially viable until the arcade machine was born, and massive arcades were opened in the 1970s. These arcade machines are what began video games' rise, and had multiple breakout hits like Pac-Man, who was the first recognizable character in video games. But there was never a true story to these games. One instrumental piece to video games featuring a narrative was Star Wars. Video game developers had seen the special effects used in Star Wars and saw that using these special effects didn't detract from the film, but actually enhanced it. This was a big sign for video games to start using narrative, as audiences thought they were getting a bit stale due to them using a lot of the same formula. This changed when Nintendo released Donkey Kong to arcade, which featured a small narrative of a plumber named Mario trying to save his girlfriend from a massive gorilla named Donkey Kong. After this, Nintendo eventually took a gamble with the past failures of the home console market and decided to release the Nintendo Entertainment System. The console was bundled with Super Mario Bros., which continued the trend of Nintendo putting a small narrative in the game, this time about saving his girlfriend Peach from the fire-breathing dragon Bowser. This console single-handedly revived the home console market after the failures of the past with the Magnavox. And with the success of Donkey Kong and Super Mario Bros., Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of both games, got straight to work on the next game, The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda was the first game that featured a full narrative in video games and gave players a character in which they could relate to in Link, followed by a narrative which took them on a journey through the setting of Hyrule, in an established genre and where players knew the rules and conventions for it. The game is hailed from some people as the first game that they cried when they played a game. The Legend of Zelda showed fans of video games that it's possible for video games to make you feel a certain way and that it's capable of generating emotions. Many companies took notice of this and started making storytelling a big part of video games. After seeing Nintendo's success in the video game market, the company SEGA returned to it after failing in the 70s and the 80s due to the video game crash. SEGA instantly saw a gap in the market for video games and the people who were growing too old for Mario in the 13 to 20-year-old age range, and came up with a new character called Sonic the Hedgehog. While Sonic was still a character marketed towards kids, he was a lot more edgy and had an attitude akin to a teenager where he would goof off and not really care. This resonated with the teenagers of the 90s, and Sonic had become a household name with his own stories, characters, and more. It was also during the 90s where Sony decided to join the video game market after a dispute with Nintendo on CD-ROM technology. Sony had already developed the technology, but Nintendo decided they didn't want to use it, so Sony used it for their own project, the PlayStation. Not only was the PlayStation revolutionary in its 3D graphics, bringing video games closer to reality, but the storytelling also got a lot better and allowed for companies to tell a lot more elaborate stories in their games. Examples for this are games like Final Fantasy VII, which some people say had the saddest death of a video game character of all time. Tomb Raider, which features one of the most iconic video game characters in Lara Croft. Game-telling stories were beginning to become commonplace, and many games stood out due to their narrative and how it was told, but one of the games that revolutionized storytelling in video games was Half-Life. The entire industry was fundamentally shifted with the release of that demo. Everybody in the gamer's side and the creator side all had their brains collectively flipped. It was the they live moment. Half-Life was groundbreaking for the story it told and the way it told its story. The game featured no cutscenes, and instead of taking the player out to show them something that happened in the story, the game allows the player to experience that event firsthand. From breathtaking vistas, underground facilities, Half-Life fundamentally had a change in the way that companies, creators, and players see video games. All that was left was to convince the outside audience of this, and that's where Grand Theft Auto 3 comes in. Grand Theft Auto 3 absolutely blew up on release. It showed the world outside of the industry that video games can tell a story like film, with it featuring a crime-like narrative like The Goodfellas or The Godfather, celebrity actors like Samuel L. Jackson, and cinematography in its cutscenes like you would see in films. It allowed people from the outside to see what video game storytelling is like and how video games can tell a story on par with film. It also showed that people are very open to the idea of video games telling a story. After the release of Grand Theft Auto 3, developers poured more and more money into making stories more film-like and realistic. For example, using motion capture to make animations more realistic and lifelike, spending more time to tell a story, with games coming in with an average of 20 hours to finish the story, and developing graphics to a point where they are somewhat indistinguishable from real life. This has allowed video games to be where they're at today, with a global market for video games set to reach $256.97 billion by 2025, and now many video games like Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, and Halo being household names with billions of people knowing what they are. Storytelling has allowed video games to evolve into a new narrative medium that can do things that film, books, and TV can't. In every other medium, you're looking in on other characters, but with video games, you yourself are the character. You make your own choices, interact with other people, and so much more. With video games now being established as a form of storytelling, I wanted to take a look at some of the games that I've taken to this medium and highlight their strengths and how well they tell a story. The first and one of the most important aspects I wanted to look at was character. Every story needs their characters, and they are the cog in the machine that bring the story to life. The game I feel personifies this the best is Final Fantasy XIV.
Ha! Acceptance! At long last! The conflagration of our clash will scorch even the stars!
Final Fantasy XIV is one of the longest games to complete, with a story taking approximately 447 hours to finish the main story, but is also hailed as one of the best Final Fantasy stories ever to be told. The game is set in Eorzea, 5 years after the 7th Umbral Calamity, in where Bahamut, an elder dragon, razed all of Eorzea to the ground. After that, the magic in the world, known as Ether, started rebuilding the country. This was done to re-release the game, as the first iteration of the game had multiple issues to do with gameplay and narrative, which the re-release mostly fixes. You play as yourself in the game, which is instrumental to the storytelling of the game and makes you feel like a character yourself. Not only that, but you share this world with a whole host of characters, all having their own story, archetypes, personality, and emotions. For example, someone like Thancred, who can be seen as like a fantasy James Bond with how smooth he is with the ladies whilst also playing the role of a spy. By the end of the game, he's become a father figure and traded in his lustful life for a life where he can protect Rean, his daughter figure. Estinian is another great example. He can be seen as a stereotypical brooding superhero like Batman. A man who excels in almost everything he does but is clouded by thoughts of revenge and anger. He ultimately realizes that it isn't worth it and begins to forgive. Instead of helping people for his own bitter goals, he begins to help people out of the kindness of his heart. You, the player character, get to see their development and get to experience the change in their character. With your interactions, you feel like you've helped them on this road of becoming a better person. A character I want to highlight for this is Alphino Leveilleur. Alphino is a character who is very self-important, egotistical and immature due to his upbringing as the son of a well-renowned politician. In a way, his character is somewhat reminiscent of King Joffrey from Game of Thrones without the temper and evil that Joffrey had. Alphino's story begins at the end of the A Realm Reborn era of Final Fantasy XIV, his goal being the salvation of Eorzea. A very noble goal for a boy at his age of 16. For his goal, he created the Crystal Braves, a military not affiliated with the other city-states of Eorzea, and for this he found the most capable soldiers in Eorzea. Whilst they were capable, they weren't fully committed to the cause of Eorzea's salvation. A lot of them were refugees from the annexation of Alamigo by the Garlean Empire 20 years ago. A lot were only in it for the money, and some people did share Alphino's belief, but they were in the minority. This all concluded at the bloody banquet of Ul'dah. Ul'dah being one of the city-states of Eorzea and a massive hub for trade and merchants. It also has a lot of corruption from the two political parties, the monetarists and the royalists. It is here where you, the player character, are caught up in a plot by the monetarists to assassinate the Sultana, and it's revealed that the Crystal Braves are secretly working for the monetarists and are complicit in the assassination of the Sultana. This costs you and your group the Scions of the Seventh Dawn greatly, with you, Alphino, and the receptionist Tataru the only ones to leave the banquet that night. Everyone else has either disappeared, been arrested, or killed. Alphino was blinded by his own arrogance and self-importance that he couldn't see that the Crystal Braves were compromised and that there was something going on. He was dead set on this idea of bringing salvation to Eorzea that he didn't notice that the people he surrounds himself with could bring his downfall.
'Tis all my doing. I believed myself the only one who truly understood Eorzea's woes, and look what that arrogance has wrought. I gave commands, influenced governments with my certainty. I treated the Crystal Braves, and even the Scions themselves, as pawns in my great scheme to save the realm. But in my headlong rush into imagined glory, I paid no heed to the ground upon which I trod.
He was tricked, and I feel like we can all relate to this in a way. That we felt foolish and that we weren't the person that we thought we were. We think that we're just a small husk of a person who doesn't know what they're doing. You want to shy away from it all and forget about it. But you can't.
Alphino, if I may? Should this place not serve our purpose, then we shall go to Ishgard. Minfilia told me many times, as long as we stand fast against despair, the beacon of hope will never be lost to sight. Be it in the snow or in the clouds, we few will see that the dawn's light shines again.
You are right, Tataru. Thank you. And thank you for your kind words, Lord Orchefon.
You have to face it head on. And that's what Alphino does. This is a turning point in his character where he acknowledges his wrongdoings and faces it head on. He allows Tataru, the receptionist, to console him. Someone who does not have any experience in magic or combat. If this was the old Alphino, he would have shot her down immediately. He never gives up on his idealistic vision of a better future. Instead, Alphino learns how to pursue his goals by working with others instead of simply trying to impose his will. He learns from his past mistakes and takes extensive measures to avoid repeating them. In the Heavensward era of Final Fantasy XIV, we spend a lot more time with Alphino. We see his self-importance and ego begin to die as he's becoming more and more mature. We travel with him across new areas, see him make new friends, lose friends, and see how he deals with grief and most importantly how he reacts to it. By the end of the Heavensward era, he is a matured young man who has seen the errors of his ways. In a way, his character arc is somewhat reminiscent to Ahsoka Tano's character from Star Wars The Clone Wars, in where at the beginning she was disrespectful to the Jedi way, but by the end she understood the Jedi way better than almost anyone. At the end of the Heavensward era and throughout the majority of the Stormblood era, we see Alphinaud take a backseat to his twin sister Alizé and take up a more advisory role. With the new skills he has learned, his diplomatic abilities have increased tenfold, now being able to empathize with people, understand their emotions and use that to negotiate with them more instead of dismissing it all. This can be seen when he deals with Hancock in Kugane. In the Shadowbringers era of Final Fantasy XIV, we get to see more of the relationship between the twins and how they interact with each other.
Another self-important little brat. Just what we need.
Reminds me of my childhood. All right, I'm sorry. It was a joke. Honestly, just a joke.
We also see that Alphinaud has become much more of a leader, with his altercation with Vorthri showing that he is not one to run when being challenged and instead standing up for the citizen he was defending.
What you need is a mirror, not a painting. It will capture the horror I see before me far better than I ever could.
And in the most recent Endwalker era of Final Fantasy XIV, we see that Alphinaud has changed completely from his Realm Reborn counterpart. He has completely grown up and that he is a capable leader, ready to sacrifice himself to save the world, as we can see in the final hours of Endwalker.
Yet, given what lies ahead, I did not wish to leave for later that which I could do today. After all, tomorrow is never promised.
Each era of Final Fantasy XIV shows his development and change in personality, from being the self-important brat at the beginning to now being a capable leader at the end of Endwalker. His character arc is completed and it leaves the player feeling proud of him, like seeing a little brother grow up. The change in his character is akin to that of the main characters of film and television. With the added layer of interaction between him and the player character, it makes that bond and relatability between you and Alphinaud that much deeper and allows us to feel that we as people are proactively helping him in his development. With that, the characters of a game are only as good as its writing and narrative, which brings me on to my next game. Created by a renowned auteur of the gaming industry for its subversion of tropes and his complex narratives, I would like to talk about NieR Replicant.
What have I done? I killed innocent people. I killed them all.
NieR Replicant was originally released back in 2010 under the name NieR and is a post-apocalypse role-playing game. It was then re-released in 2021 under the name NieR Replicant version 1.22474487139. The game features a simple surface narrative, but as you get deeper and deeper into the game, the narrative and themes become much more existential and depressing. The NieR games are known for their masterful storytelling and how they do not shy away from depressing events in their games. Game gives a sense of hopelessness, not unlike other post-apocalypse films like I Am Legend and Stalker. We begin in 2053 Tokyo with an unknown young man trying to protect his young sister suffering from a disease from monsters. There is a black book on the side which he pleads with her not to open. The disease that afflicts his sister covers her with black markings all around her body and shows her coughing. After fighting off the monsters, we return to the sister seeing that she's opened the black book, with her saying,
Always been the one helping me. So I just wanted you.
and then the camera pans out, showing us the ravaged city, and then fades to black and shows us 1,412 years into the future, which is the first subversion for this post-apocalypse. We expect it to take place in this ravaged version of Tokyo, but instead it takes place over millennia in the future, with the two characters at the beginning nowhere to be seen. The narrative subverts our expectation and throws us into this world we have no idea about. A world that is fantasy in nature but has aspects of the old world, for example, crumbling bridges, old technology, while being mixed with swords, bows, lances, etc. Instead of feeling that we've gone 1,000 years into the future, we feel like we've gone 1,000 years into the past. It shows how badly the apocalypse affected the people and that the humans have lost all of our modern technology to time and disease. In this new time is where we meet our main protagonist, NieR, who looks suspiciously like the boy in the beginning of the game. We also meet his younger sister, Yona, who is suffering from the same disease as the younger sister in the prologue. The first act of the game is dedicated to building the world and showing the effects of the disease and the monsters now called Shades that ruined the world back in 2053. The way the game does this is that it gives us a main objective. Find a cure for Yona's disease, now named the Black Scrawl. In an odd way, the game feels surprisingly bright for a story about a post-apocalypse. You're excited to adventure through unseen lands, meeting new people and saving your sister at the end of all of it. On our adventure, we find Grimoire Weiss, a talking book with the ability to use the particles around him as a sort of magic. Poplar and Deviler, NieR's motherly figures, state that it is said in legend that Grimoire Weiss using the sacred verses must battle and destroy Grimoire Noir to cure the disease. Poplar and Deviler are the closest thing NieR and Yona had to parents, as their parents died at a young age due to unknown circumstances. There are logs in the loading screens about how both of them would sometimes come over and sing and cook for Yona or read to her while NieR was away. NieR believes that this will cure Yona, so he travels from his village to places like the Eyrie, where he meets Kaine, a vulgar and foul-mouthed swordswoman who is half shade, half human. He also travels to Emil's manor, where he meets Emil, a sweetheart cursed with anything he looks at getting petrified. After developing the world and showing the effects of all that went wrong, the game finishes the first act after finding all the sacred verses. There is a big attack on NieR's village from the Shades. Emil comes running to NieR's village, hurt, and warns NieR of the impending attack. But it's too late. The Shades are already here, followed by one colossal shade. Everyone is evacuated from the village, whilst NieR battles the colossal shade. NieR manages to fend off the shade and make it regress into a smaller form, then leading it into the library. While in the library, they trap it in the basement, and Kaine asks Emil to petrify her to trap it down there. While hesitant, Emil petrifies Kaine and traps the shade down in the basement. All seems won. Until the true villain of the story, the Shadow Lord, swoops in and kidnaps Yona. The Shadow Lord is the first shade ever created, and looks similar to NieR in multiple ways, for example the hair, the body structure, the fighting style. This foreshadowing allows us as players to speculate what's going on here, since there is obviously something deeper in this game. Act 2 of the game changes it completely. It is set 5 years in the future. Kaine is still petrified whilst Emil is looking for a cure, and NieR is doing his all to search for Yona. This is no longer the old NieR. He is now fully grown up and will do anything to save Yona. We can see in his new outfit that it's very aesthetically pleasing, but over his heart is a piece of chainmail showing his heart was broken after Yona's capture. We look into his eyes and we can see whilst they are beautiful, they're hiding his despair. His hair with a sleek silver colour hides how disheveled it actually is. He is trying to appear strong, but deep inside he's on the verge of breaking. That excitement and brightness you felt at the beginning of the game is completely gone. You see NieR tearing through his enemies like it's nothing. They took something away from you, and you will stop at nothing to save the one you love. His new mission is to find the Shadow Lord and rescue Yona, and he will stop at nothing to complete this mission. The first part of this quest is to free Kaine from her petrification. We start by going to Emil's manor, and then find a hidden bunker under his manor. It is here we find out that Emil is actually a human test subject to create a human weapon. It is then revealed that Emil had a sister named Halua, also a human test subject, now a grotesque skeletal creature. She is the reason that Emil was created, to make sure she had a way of being contained, which failed and destroyed the facility. After fighting with her, Emil then fuses with Halua, gaining her power but condemning him to a grotesque skeletal form.
Good God. Welcome back, Emil. You've been through a lot.
This allows Emil to unpetrify Kaine, and after finding the other fragments for the key to the Shadow Lord's castle, they fight through the castle. This is the section of the game where everything is revealed to the player.
I remember. Deviler. Poplar. You are not human. In fact... Oh no.
Yeah, sometimes the truth can be a real bitch. You want to finish that thought for him, sister? All of us, every person standing in this room, are mere shells created by the true humans.
What are you saying?
You still don't get it? You aren't human.
So then humans, I mean, the true humans, are extinct?
No. They still live on. You know them as shades. Each shade is a twisted remnant of what was once a human being.
The shades you've been fighting all this time, they are human souls that have been separated from their bodies, called gestalts. You yourself are not human, but a replicant. A shell for a human soul to return to after some time. Deviler and Popola are androids to make sure that the rejoining between Gestalt and replicants goes smoothly, and if NieR carries on, it will end all of humanity. Everything you know is a lie. Reality is crumbling around you. You as the player are shocked since you've had an inkling of something deeper is going on, but you couldn't imagine it being this deep. You tear through the enemies. You tear through Popola and Deviler, your mother figures, killing innocent people's souls, and watch Emil sacrifice himself to save both you and Kaine, and you sit there and ask, is it worth it? His loving brother role defines him completely, and it is not important. As he repeats many times, if to fulfill his mission he must exterminate all that was standing in his way, including Deviler and Popola, his closest friends. The actions of such a character, cemented in his convictions, will eventually cause the extinction of humanity. You defeat the Shadow Lord, save Yona, and the credits roll. And then you realize that was one of 5 endings. You played Route A, and you're about to start Route B. NieR Replicant is a game that was designed to be played more than once due to its narrative. Each route has subtle changes which drip feeds you information and feature different endings. Route B allows you to hear the shades as you kill them, and see what they were thinking as you mercilessly slaughtered them in Route A. Route C and D are completely different endings, and where Kaine's shade takes over. You have 2 options. Kill Kaine to free her from her burdened life, or erase yourself from existence to save her. Kaine, someone who you've travelled across the land with, who you've built a connection with. Do you save yourself and let her rest? Or erase yourself and let her live? And finally, ending E. Ending E is an ending which shows even in the darkest nights there will be a light. Emil comes back after teasing he was still alive at the end of ending B. You play as Kaine at the end of ending D after NieR erases themselves from existence. You find a secret underground facility of the old world, and you remember about the man who saved your life.
Go back. Don't. Shut up! I already made up my mind. Nobody tells me what to do. I swore I would be a sword. I swore that I would be your sword. Do you hear me? So I am going to get you back, and I don't care what it takes. Who the fuck do you think you are to just up and disappear like that, huh? I'm the one who gets to decide what my life means to me. It's my life, and I'll do whatever I want with it. So quit wasting time like a brainless fuckwit and get your ass back here now!
NieR Replicant is special. It is iconic for it is written as a commentary on violence. To be more specific, the useless violence we see every day that comes to nothing. We see how useless it is and how it detracts from humanity. The lies told to NieR, the cruelty NieR shows to the shades, and how NieR carries on after being told what he's doing is wrong. The game may tell a narrative, but the narrative sends a message. Similar to films like The Seventh Seal, Paths of Glory, To Kill a Mockingbird, they send a message about the world we live in, about the people in the world, and how we live our lives. The final game I would like to look at takes place in a genre that film reveled in for years, with films like Unforgiven, Once Upon a Time in the West, and High Noon. Now video games have decided to join the immortal Western genre with Red Dead Redemption 2. In film, the narrative, writing, conventions, and codes are usually dictated by its genre. This is the same for video games, as we can see from Red Dead Redemption 2. It tried to capture that feeling of being an outlaw running from the police with your gang just trying to survive out in the West. You play as Arthur Morgan, one of the main members of the Vandalin gang in the last days of the Outlaws. You're struggling to put food on the table for everyone as the police are cracking down on all criminal activities in a way to disperse all the gangs. We can see that the narrative, characters, location, and time all correlate with the genre of the game, showing that the genre has its own vision of what a Western should be, and for the game to fit into that genre, it must follow the certain conventions and narratives set by the genre. The narrative follows certain rules to make sure that the game itself stays in the genre of a Western, exactly how film does it. The game also follows staples of the genre, for example the iconic saloon fight that the genre made so iconic. If we compare this bar fight scene to the bar fight in Dodger City, we can see that the game has similarities in the way it does it, where everyone gets involved in it. Eventually it gets taken outside. The only difference is in that in the game you are the one experiencing it and proactively deciding on the outcome of the fight with the actions you take. The genre in literature and cinema, as in video games, carries a vision that can at times turn out to be monolithic, frozen by the codes governing it. The themes of Red Dead Redemption 2 revolve around trust. Who can Arthur trust? At the beginning of the game, he thinks he knows this. He thinks he can trust the higher-ups of the Vanderling gang, but slowly realizes that this life isn't for him anymore, and that he can't trust Dutch, Micah, and the higher-ups anymore. The Vanderling gang itself is a callback to Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. This can be seen in the opening of the game as we can see the gang making their way through the snowy mountains. You fight rival gangs, go hunting, collect debts, all the things an outlaw would do in the Wild West. And at night, you spend time with the gang, drinking and making merry, while moving from place to place, making sure you don't get hunted down. One by one, members you come to grow and love die from the axe of the gang. For example, Hosea, the father figure of the gang, gets shot right in front of you in a heist gone wrong. Lenny, the youngest member of the group, a person who a few days ago you were getting drunk with, doesn't notice the man with a shotgun right in front of him. Arthur, by the end of the game, is done with the life of an outlaw, and after being diagnosed with tuberculosis, he stops trusting the people in charge. Instead, he trusts the people who work for a living in the gang, and since his time is almost up, he tries to help them leave the gang and survive out in the world. The final words he tells John, the member of the gang he trusts the most, is,
"Go. Arthur, go to your family. Arthur, get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man."
This moment shares how Arthur sees the world of outlaws now, and hopes John heeds his words and lives a life of joy instead of dread. It allows us to see the old world of outlaws and cowboys through a new lens, with the genre dictating how the narrative setting, codes and conventions shall play out. Instead of being in film form though, it allows the player to experience it firsthand, and every minuscule detail has been made to make sure that the game's genre is undoubtedly Western. It also modernizes a lot of out-of-date stereotypes seen in the early Westerns, where the Native American people were represented as savages. In Red Dead Redemption 2, they are seen as people just living by their own beliefs. The Vanderling gang is a host to multiple people of color and allows a safe haven for them from the outside world, where they are seen as different due to their skin color. From the accents of the characters, Arthur getting tuberculosis, and the actions the character takes, they all give that feeling of the ending of the Wild West and that the days of the outlaws are over. The game fulfills its own vision, guided by the codes and conventions of the Western genre, and shows that video games can take film genres and put their own vision to it. By looking at the rise of video games as a narrative medium and 3 examples of video games with exemplary examples of character, narrative and genre, we can see that video games have become a new narrative medium with its own caveats and advantages. There are many things that can be like film, for example the character development and narrative, but video games can take that one step further in many ways due to the nature of interactivity, and it allows video games to tell in new types of narratives and show more than film can. On the other hand, film allows the viewer to relax and look in on another world without having to worry about interacting with the world, and also with the event of streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, it has made watching films a lot more accessible to the mass audiences. Whilst not for all the same audiences, video games have shown that they are capable of telling a narrative on par and even exceeding film in some ways, with different ways of telling stories and being able to share interaction with the world and characters. I look forward to seeing how video games change in the future and how they evolve in accessibility and storytelling.